And now let's look at the next subsection. We're still in the method section. We looked at search strategy, and now let's see, how did they decide which studies they included? How did they know which ones to include in their review? Well, they had some criteria, some inclusion criteria, and you're going to need to set up some inclusion criteria for your study as well. The included studies focused on the use of iPod, iPad, iPod Touch, iPod Nano, iPhone, or iPad. So just iPods and related devices. So they had to use one of those types of devices. To be included in this review, the device had to be used for the purpose of teaching a new skill, or increasing or decreasing behaviors. So increasing behaviors, that desirable behaviors, or decreasing undesirable behaviors. Or, so teach a new skill, increase or decrease behaviors, or increase or improve academic, social, communication, or other adaptive behaviors. Okay. So it had to use iPods or related devices. It had to use the device to teach some kind of skill or adapt behavior. And it had to do that in students or in a person with a developmental disability. Here they defined developmental disability as autism, ASD, intellectual disability, or related syndromes like Down syndrome and cerebral palsy. Here they also say included studies had to provide empirical data on the effects of the iPod-based teaching program. So articles that did not report empirical data on the teaching program were excluded. So in other words, they couldn't just, it shouldn't really have been about perceptions, like the teacher's perceptions. They wanted evidence that the intervention using the iPad helped, the instruction using the iPad helped teach some kind of skill to the students. So they wanted data that showed the improvement of skills. So if it was an anecdotal report or if it was a review article, those were not included in their literature reviews. Let's see. Okay, for data extraction, for your paper, you don't have to worry about that. For the purposes of understanding, you could. I've had students include a data extraction section before. You can or you don't have to. It's not required in the rubric, but it does. You would say something like, basically, this is how did they summarize their studies? So they just explain how they summarize them, and you're using what's called the matrix method. So you could describe how you put all of the studies in a matrix and analyze them for X. But that's not required for the paper. And then inter-observer agreement is something that they used because they had multiple authors, and every study was reviewed by several authors, and then they had to see whether they agreed in their identification of the studies. And so this gives their article more credibility, and in fact, in that it wasn't just one person saying, oh, these articles all relate, but no, they went through and said, did they agree? That if more than one researcher agreed that the study met the criteria, then that gives it more systematicity. This is not required for yours. You are writing this by yourself, and so this is not something you need to worry about. Okay, one thing I want to show you is the table of Table 1 in the results section. So you'll notice that they have a results section. I'll scroll down, and they have you'll see the results section is basically summarizing all the different studies that they looked at. And then they have a discussion section that draws their conclusions from their review of the literature. So I want you to go back and look. If you're following along with your own paper, go back and look at Table 1. Okay, now I'm going to reduce the view on this a little bit so you can kind of see, first to see the whole table. Here's the whole table and what it looks like. Every study that they reviewed is listed here. They categorized them in terms of what kinds of skills were the students being taught. academic skills, 1 study with academic skills. Communication skills, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 studies related to teaching communication skills to students with autism using an iPad or an iPod. They found 2 studies related to teaching employment skills. They found 3 studies related to teaching leisure skills to students with autism using an iPad. And they found 1 study teaching transitional skills for students with autism using an iPad. Okay. So if you look, you can see all of the studies kind of summarized here in this table. So this makes this table one of the most valuable pages in this article. You can quickly see at a glance the 15 studies that make up the body of research related to using iPods and iPads to teach students with developmental disabilities like autism certain skills. And we know the types of skills that they've been taught in research: academic, communication, employment, leisure, and transitioning. And you'll see different aspects of each study in these columns. Okay, so now I've increased the zoom on this so you can see hopefully better. Notice this academic study, Kagohara et al., 2012, Kagohara, Sigafus, Akamadi, O'Reilly, and Lancioni, 2012. These are the authors. Remember that first study we looked at about of the 5 studies that we looked at the very beginning? Checking the spelling of words on a computer word processor. So this is that study. We also looked at Flores et al., 2012, requesting preferred stimuli by selecting pictures on an iPad. Okay, so that was the study that compared communication with a picture system versus communication with an iPad, making requests, communication skills of students with autism. There was one about employment. Remember the one about they used video modeling to teach a young man in an employment setting, and he was more independent, and he didn't need coaching from his job coach afterward. So that's this one. And we had another one about using iPads and iPods to watch an entertainment video. That was the Kagohara 2011 article. And you notice Kagohara keeps showing up in this because evidently Kagohara is a researcher that is really dedicated to researching the use of iPods with students with developmental disabilities. And then lastly, the last article we looked at, when I showed you those 5 articles at the beginning, there was one that used video modeling with iPods to teach students how to transition. And that was this article, the Seahack et al. Article. Okay, so basically those 5 articles I showed you at the beginning, these researchers in this article, this literature review article, those 5 articles I showed you are 5 of the 15 articles that these researchers looked at and summarized. And if you scroll through, now I want you to scroll through and look at the results section. I'm sorry, this is not very pretty. Let me just go back here where it says results. Okay, so look at the different sections. This is studies focused on teaching academic skills, and here there was only 1 study and they describe it. Remember there was 1 study in the chart just now? Then the next section, studies focused on communication skills. 8 studies employed the iPods for communication skills. And then the next pages, I'm going to use my page down button and page through. Sorry, all of this summary here, these are summarizing the studies that were listed on that table. The 8 studies related to communication skills. And they're summarizing them. Then we get to section 3.3, studies focused on developing employment skills. 2 articles focused on developing employment skills using iPods. So we scroll down. This is summarizing and synthesizing those articles. 3.4, studies focused on teaching leisure skills. 3 studies were identified that focused on using iPods for leisure skills. And here they're summarized. And then the last subsection, 3.5, studies focused on teaching transitioning. 1 study focused on independent transitioning to 4 students. Okay, and then that is summarized. So that's the results section of a lit review, is a summarization of a summary of all of the studies that you found related to your topic. And then the last section is the discussion. Read through the discussion, and you'll see how they summarize the results that, I'm sorry, you'll see the conclusions they draw based on their review of all of those articles. And then lastly, you'll see the references. And if you look, you'll see those 5 articles that we looked at are all listed here in the reference, along with the other 10 out of the 15 that they found. And that's what a literature review is. So if we go back and we look at our presentation, it is a systematic location, identification, and analysis of other research related to your topic. So you're going to find articles, summarize them, and draw conclusions about the state of the research in that topic. Okay, so hopefully after this presentation you understand what a literature review is and what you are doing with a literature review.